Hello everybody, welcome to Carpo's reality here. This is my reality because it's the only reality I know, so that's why I have to disclose that, so you know. We're living in a world, in a life, in a universe that is ever perplexing and amazing in its complexity, in its depth. And it seems like the more we learn, the more there is to learn. Yet, we as humans really want to grasp onto something that we can hang on to that is universal. A truth that cannot be disproven. A truth that is universally accepted. And most importantly, a truth that assists us in our endeavors, in our pursuits through our lives. I had a discussion earlier with someone where we were speaking about our specific story that somebody had told, and I said, honestly, even if that story were true, it wouldn't matter to me, because the person, whether or not the person was right or wrong, was irrelevant in the long term, because the story was about a situation that nobody can benefit from, whether it's true or false. Many of the truths we encounter, we find, have no real benefit to know. I'm not going to think of an example, but I guess I would probably go with, for example, the Kennedy assassination. Many people spend, countless hours researching this. The truth is, we ask ourselves, why do we want to know the truth? What is it about the truth that makes us want to know the very details of all truths? And it's because we yearn for an understanding of our surroundings and our world. But many of these truths, even when presented, even when understood, do nothing to help us further ourselves. And in fact, many of them bring us down as a society as a whole, cause us to turn against one another. It's sad. The enduring principles, the ones that endure through time, the ones that never fall out of fashion, if you will, are things like integrity, honesty, love, fairness. But all of these are just shallow, imposing words that tell us what something could be. They give us a description in language of what we think something should or shouldn't be. Now, I have a book here that I'd like to read part of. It's the reason why I'm reading this is for the sake of those who find themselves worrying about things or harming themselves out of stress, out of worry about their future or what they could be or couldn't be. But more than that, it's for the people who like to think of things in black and white, for the people who believe in good and evil, that believe that things are either one way or another, you're either with us or against us type attitudes. Because this fell out of fashion before it even became a fashion. This was never a good way to live. The first paragraph from this, it says, everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes must be reconciled. The Kybalion. Which the Kybalion is the book that I'm reading right now. I've actually read it before, but this is the book I'm reading out of, rather. The Hermetic teachings are to the effect that the difference between things seemingly diametrically opposed to each other is merely a matter of degree. It teaches that the pairs of opposites may be reconciled, and that thesis and antithesis are identical in nature, but different in degree, and that the universal reconciliation of opposites is affected by a recognition of this principle of polarity. The teachers claim that illustrations of this principle may be had on every hand, and from an examination into the real nature of anything, they begin by showing that spirit and matter are but merely two poles of the same thing, the intermediate planes being degrees of vibration. They show that the all and the many are the same, the difference being merely a matter of degree of the mental manifestation. Thus, the law and laws are two opposite poles of one thing. Infinite mind and finite minds, yada yada. Now, I'd love to read this whole thing, but I'll only be able to read part of it because it would take hours to read this, but I think this part's important. Then passing on to the physical plane, they illustrate the principle by showing that heat and cold are identical in nature, the differences being merely a matter of degrees. The thermometer shows many degrees of temperature, the lowest pole being called cold, and the highest, heat. Between these two poles are many degrees of heat or cold. Call them either, and you are equally correct. The higher of 2 degrees is always warmer. The lower is always colder. There is no absolute standard. All is a matter of degree. There is no place on the thermometer where heat ceases and cold begins. It's all a matter of higher or lower vibrations. The very term high and low, which we are compelled to use, are but poles of the same thing. The terms are relative. So, with east and west, travel around the world in an eastward direction, and you reach a point which is called west, at your starting point. And you return from that westward point, travel far enough north, and you will find yourself traveling south, or vice versa. Light and darkness are poles of the same thing, with many degrees between them. The musical scale is the same. Starting with the C, you move upward until you reach another C, and so on. The differences between the two ends of the board being the same, with many degrees between the two extremes. The scale of color is the same, higher and lower vibrations. Higher and lower vibrations being that the only difference between high violet and low red. These are cycles of color. Large and small are relative, so are noise and quiet, hard and soft. Follow the rule. Likewise, sharp and dull, positive and negative are two poles of the same thing, with countless degrees between them. Good and bad are not absolute. We call one end of the scale good and the other bad, or one end good and the other evil. According to the use of the terms, a thing is less good than the thing higher in the scale. But that less good thing, in turn, is more good than the thing next below it. And so on. The more or less being regulated by the position on the scale. And so it is on the mental plane. Love and hate are generally regarded as being things diametrically opposed to each other, entirely different, unreconcilable. But we apply the principle of polarity. We find that there is no such thing as absolute love, or absolute hate, as distinguished from each other. The two are merely terms applied to the two poles of the same thing. Beginning at any one point in the scale, we find more love or less hate as we ascend the scale, and more hate or less love as we descend. This being true no matter from what point, high or low, we may start. There are degrees of love and hate. And there is a middle point where like and dislike become so faint that it is difficult to distinguish between them. Courage and fear come under the same rule. The pairs of opposites exist everywhere. Where you find one thing, you find its opposites, the two poles. And this is the fact that enables the Hermeticist to transmute one metal state into another, along the lines of polarization. Things belonging to different classes cannot be transmuted into each other, but things of the same class may be changed, that is, may have their polarity changed. Thus, love never becomes east or west or red or violet, but it may, often and does, turn into hate, and likewise, hate may be transformed into love by changing its polarity. Courage may be transmuted into fear, and the reverse. Hard things may be rendered soft, dull things become sharp, hot things become cold, and so on. The transmutation always being between things of the same kind, of different degrees. Take the case of the fearful man. By raising his mental vibrations along the line of fear, courage, he can be filled with the highest degree of courage and fearlessness, and, likewise, the slothful man may change himself into an active, energetic individual, simply by polarizing along the lines of the desired quality. The student who is familiar with the processes by which the various schools of mental science, etc., produce changes in the mental states of those following their teachings may not readily understand the principle underlying many of these changes. When, however, the principle of polarity is once grasped, and it is seen that the mental changes are occasioned by a change of polarity, a sliding along the same scale, the hatter is readily understood. Now I'm going to skip ahead to the end because I love this chapter. I just had to share it. The next one's about rhythm, but it's very similar in vibrations. It goes on to talk about vibes, positivity, negativity, and fear. Now, the rhythm part. This is the chapter that I really wanted to read this part because it was really important to me, but I don't think I'll be able to find it. And we were talking about pendulums, and they're talking about the difference between the I and the me. But, you know, here we go. I wanted to talk about the masculine and the feminine for a minute. First off, I wanted to say that, you know, how I'm trying to picture how I try to visualize these things. That they talk about a pendulum. Now, when you're having, I'll just close the book. When you're having an experience in life, it can be deemed positive or negative. The Hermeticists believe that you cannot have ecstasy without negativity. In other words, it is the bad experiences in life that determine the good. And that no matter what level you're on, like the poor man thinks that the rich man is happier because he has money. The rich man envies the poor man because he can enjoy his meal so much more. These are things that each class and each group of people, their own polarity and their own system of development. There's a positivity and a negativity in every life. When you view a different person's life, it may seem that theirs is much worse or much better, but really, the polarity in their life is shifted differently. Say that the less emotion that you show, then the less positive or the less negative emotion that you allow yourself to experience, then you'll have a duller perception of the positive. And the wider the pendulum swings, the happier you'll be in the end. If you have an extremely negative day, back to the other end to positivity. And this is, of course, much more complex. I'm trying to simplify it here, but we find that there's little pendulums within the pendulums. So you're swinging really far one way one year, but you also have mini pendulums that swing month to month, and pendulums within pendulums that swing day to day, and even hour to hour, and minute to minute. These are the cycles within the cycles, and the wheels within wheels. There are vibrational frequencies to everything, and I know people take this as just saying, well, everything's vibration, you know. What the hell does that mean? Well, I'll talk about that here. What does vibration mean? First I have to find the thing that I just dropped. Vibration of frequency. People say, you know, yeah, atoms vibrate and whatnot, but how do I know that, you know, vibration is really the key to the universe? You know, this is what people talk about, vibrations and frequencies. And I wish that I could explain it, but it's not something that can be explained in words, and this is why I got the book out, to try to understand this. Here we go. I'm just going to read the last part, because this is about taking charge of your life and, you know, your destiny. The majority of people are more or less the slaves of heredity, environment, etc., and manifest very little freedom. They are swayed by the opinions, customs, and thoughts of the outside world, and also by their emotions, feelings, and moods, etc. They manifest no mastery worthy of the name. They indignantly repudiate this assertion, saying, "Why, I am certainly free to act and do as I please. I do what I want to do." But they fail to explain whence arise the want to and as I please. What makes them want to do one thing in preference to another? What makes them please to do this and not to do that? Is there no because to their pleasing and wanting? The master can change these pleases and wants into others at the opposite end of the mental pole. He is also able to will, instead of to will because of some feeling, mood, emotion, or environmental suggestion arouses a tendency or desire within him to do so. And this falls along the lines of why people vote the way they do, and why not just the media, but, you know, every company knows how to play into your emotions and your fears and your wants and your desires, and they're telling you what to buy and what you need, what you should do. And people think that they act independently, but the truth is you can look at the statistics and see what people buy when, how they're swayed by what people say, and mastering yourself is a matter of getting rid of this and realizing when it's happening. The majority of people are carried along like the falling stone, obedient to environment, outside influences, and internal moods, desires, not to speak of the desires and wills of others stronger than themselves, heredity, environment, and suggestion, carrying them along without resistance on their part, or exercise of the will. Moved like the pawns on a checkerboard of life, they play their parts and are laid aside after the game is over. But the masters, knowing the rules of the game, rise above the plane of the material life. and placing themselves in touch with the higher powers of their nature, dominate their own moods, characters, qualities, and polarity, as well as the environment surrounding them, and thus becomes movers in the game instead of pawn causes. Movers in the game instead of pawns, causes instead of effects. The masters do not escape the causation of the higher planes, but fall in with the higher laws and thus master circumstances on the lower plane. This means dealing with the shit you gotta deal with. They form a conscious part of the law instead of being mere blind instruments. While they serve on the higher planes, they rule on the material planes. There is no such thing as chance. The blind goddess has been abolished by reason. We are able to see now, with eyes made clear by knowledge, that everything is governed by universal law, and that the infinite number of laws are but manifestations of the one law, the law which is the all. Okay. Even the hairs on the head are numbered. As the scriptures have said, there's nothing outside the law, nothing that happens contrary to it. And yet, do not make the mistake of supposing that man is but a blind automaton. Far from that. The Hermetic teachings are that man may use the law to overcome laws, and that the higher will always prevail against the lower, until at last he has reached the stage in which he seeks refuge in the law itself, and laughs the phenomenal laws to scorn. Are you able to grasp the inner meaning of this? And hence the end of the chapter. This stuff is amazing. I mean, to me, it came to me at the right time. I got this a couple years back, I think, but whenever I read it, I gain something new from it, and I love to share. This is the part I was talking about, pleasure. The Hermeticists go still further in this matter. They teach that before one is able to enjoy a certain degree of pleasure, he must have swung as far proportionately towards the other pole of feeling. They hold, however, that the negative is precedent to the positive in this matter. So, to say that in experiencing a certain degree of pleasure, it does not follow that one will have to pay for it with a corresponding degree of pain. On the contrary, the pleasure is the rhythmic swing, according to the law of compensation, for a degree of pain previously experienced, either in the present life or in a previous incarnation. Okay, the laws of compensation, there we go. They play an important part in the lives of men and women. It will be noticed that one generally pays the price of anything he possesses or lacks. If he has one thing, he lacks another. The balance is struck. No one can keep his penny and have a bit of cake at the same time. Everything has its pleasant and unpleasant sides. The thing that one gains are always paid for by the things that one loses. The rich possess much that the poor lack, while the poor often possess things that are beyond the reach of the rich. The millionaire may have the inclination towards feasting, and the wealth wherewith to secure all the dainties and luxuries of the table, while he lacks the appetite to enjoy the same. He envies the appetite and digestion of the laborer who lacks the wealth and inclinations of the millionaire, and who gets more pleasure from his plain food than the millionaire could ever obtain, even if his appetite were not jaded, nor his digestion ruined, for the wants, habits, and inclinations differ. And so it is through life. The law of compensation is ever in operation, striving to balance and counterbalance, and always succeeding in time, even though several lives may be required for the return of the pendulum of rhythm. And for the very final part of what I'd like to talk about here has to do with male and female energy, and positivity and negativity. A lot of people talk about positive and negative, and they give a connotation to the negative. The word negative should have never meant bad. It never did. In fact, the negative is where the energy flows. It's the reason why the female is attached to negative polarity, or rather negative, and the male is the positive. There's a reason for this. They believe that in atoms are these, I can't remember the terms that they use, corpuscles, I guess, where, and this is how the Hermeticists believe that atoms are created, that these positive ions, I guess, if you would, a bunch of negative ions gather around a positive electron, right, or proton, whatever the hell it is, and a bunch of the negative ones are influenced by this positive particle, if you will, and they manifest atoms. You could think of that as the harem of the positivity, but the negative produces the atom So it's the female aspect of the energy, the creating aspect of it. It's so much more complex. It sounds so dumb when I put it that way, but that's exactly, basically what's going on in the minds of Hermeticists, as well as science is starting to fucking catch on to this finally. Hopefully in the future we don't have to, feel like idiots for talking about these invisible energies, because it's the same way that people felt about radiation. People thought they were crazy. What do you mean there's invisible waves going through the air, Are you nuts? Even Einstein himself, the man of the century, talked about the ether, and the ether, from whence this energy comes, this middleman between matter and the ethereal, or another dimension, the other realm, whatever you want to call it. There seems to be a middleman between that. And that middleman is what draws atoms together. So while the atoms are created in the material world, what brings atoms together into molecules is still not quite understood. In other words, they have affinities. Certain atoms have affinities for each other. They have likes and wants. They attach to certain ones, and other ones they're not so interested in. Other ones they really want bad. Some atoms will completely repel each other. And these atoms are born out of that female energy, and then these atoms decide what they want to do with their lives, so to speak, but they're still following the law. Sometimes an atom may act out of line, but generally they're going to follow the pattern of law. An atom is going to attach to an atom that it has an affinity for. Then those atoms are going to bond into a molecule that has a structure for some reason. There seems to be the ether is what drives that force behind what makes things exist in the first place. Trying to put it to words is very difficult, and this is how I always know that when I'm on the right track in life, is when something becomes too difficult to explain. If I can still explain it and I can still understand it, then I haven't got it. And I definitely haven't got this all figured out. But understanding the idea of the pendulums, the ideas of the polarity, and understanding that we need to be movers and not moved by this universe. We can take control of ourselves, take control of our lives. This is the reason why sitting in meditation is such a powerful thing, is because you're abandoning the external and you're embracing the inner I, not the me, which the me, the more we learn to associate ourselves with who we truly are rather than what we are. I mean, it's amazing how many people do associate themselves with their clothes, and that's part of who they are, or even their car. And if you strip these people down, they wouldn't know what to do. Well, it's no different associating yourself with your skin and your body. Yes, this is your body, but it's not who you are. And when people start to talk like this, folks blow them off. Materialist people will blow, the things I'm saying off here as just being mystical jargon. And that's fine. That's totally understandable, because that's exactly the way I've felt over the years. I am a skeptic by nature, and I pick everything apart. Everything. I don't let a story get by me and fool myself with it. But when it comes to the Hermetic teachings, there's nothing to dispute. You can't argue against these laws. You can't argue against these discoveries. If anybody is willing to look into, the teachings, these mystery school teachings, and can say, well, there's nothing to gain from this, then you just don't get it. And that's why they will say, those who have ears to hear and eyes to see. When a person says that, they sound pious. It sounds like you're saying, what, you don't think I'm smart enough to understand this stuff? So if I were to say, well, you only understand this if you get it, either get it or you don't, the person would say, well, you just think you're better than me? What, do you think that you grasp it? Well, yeah, I do, because I live by it, and it's not something that I just developed overnight. If I read this book 10 years ago, it would just be, okay, that's interesting, but what can I gain from it? All the insights I've had in my life have allowed me to understand my pendulum. I'm understanding how my pendulum swings, how it works, how these things affect me. And I'm going to be a mover in my life, instead of letting life move me. But never be so attached to that movement. Be empowered. Empower yourself. Educate yourself. If you haven't read the Kybalion, it's a very short book. It's actually considered written by the 3 initiates. There's a lot of conspiracy bullshit about how maybe it was only written, you know, it says, a study of the Hermetic philosophy of ancient Egypt and Greece by 3 initiates. The lips of wisdom are closed, except to the ears of understanding. And that's the line that gets people. And I've said that before, and they're like, well, you just think you understand it. This is why I don't talk about these things anymore. You get to a certain point in your life, an understanding where, no, you may not live in 100% of the light of the principles or what you're learning, but you understand them, and you're applying them to your life, and you're trying to better yourself. And each day you grow a little bit, and you understand it. Understanding your emotion means you can grasp it. It means you know how to be angry when you need to. You know how to be motivated when you need to. You know how to be sad when you can. When you feel like having an emotional response to something, you can. In other words, you don't have to harden yourself to the world. You're immersed in it, but you're not controlled by it. So you can get over your emotions quickly and realize when something bad happens, the first thing I think is, all right, something good's going to happen next. Or if I'm sick, I think the first thing I'm going to feel is, well, I'm going to be better tomorrow. And that's the path of life. Growth. What else can I say?